This episode looks a little different from what I'd originally planned. We had a Georgia Power representative lined up to come on the show and answer your questions directly. I'd sent over a list of topics in advance, but as of recording today, that interview hasn't come together yet. But it's still something we hope to make happen down the road, so stay tuned. In the meantime, Rockdale County still deserves answers about what data center growth means for your power bill. So I went looking for another source who could speak to a lot of these same questions. And I have to thank our friend Corliss Turner for putting me in touch with Tom Kraus, the legislative liaison for the Georgia Public Service Commission, who ultimately made this episode happen. The Georgia PSC is the body that actually regulates Georgia Power. They're the ones who approve rate increases, set the rules for how new customers like data centers get connected to the grid, and decide what protections residential customers get along the way. If Georgia Power isn't able to sit down with us, the people overseeing Georgia Power seemed like the right next call. My guest today is Jason Shaw, the chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission. He's going to walk us through what the commission actually does, why it exists, and how much authority it has over a company like Georgia Power. From there, we're going to get into the large load rule, the open investigation into fuel costs, and what's still uncertain, even with the protections that are currently in place. So let's get into it. Georgia PSC Chairman Jason Shaw, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time today, sir.
Yes, sir. Great to be with you.
I want to jump straight into the questions. Hopefully this will take less than 30 minutes to respect your time. If you could, let's start by explaining what the Public Service Commission is, what authority it has over a company like Georgia Power, and why Georgia has a body like the PSC in the first place.
Well, so a lot of people, don't know exactly what the Public Service Commission is, the PSC. Every state has a commission. Some states refer to it as their state's utility commission. Some they call it the Public Service Commission, like we do in Georgia. And another difference between states, even though every state has one, has a utility commission, but some states, the commissioners are elected, and in other states, the commissioners are appointed, much like a lot of the other constitutional offices. Other states, some states appoint like insurance commissioner and things like that. And in Georgia, we're elected, we're considered constitutional officers. But the PSC has been around since the 1800s. It actually started out as the state's railway commission. I guess the legislature got tired of setting rail freight rates every year, so they set up the commission to do that. And then eventually the commission turned into a regulatory body for the utilities. So we have electricity under our purview. We have our electric unit, our natural gas unit, and our telecom unit. And since I've been on the commission, January will be 8 years for me. We actually added a fourth unit that was under our electric unit before, which is our renewables and energy efficiency unit. So we have those different units. But what the PSC is for, and what it's structured to do, is to be the regulatory body that keeps these monopoly providers in a competitive situation. So normally in a capitalist economy, the competition is what drives prices down. Since we don't have that, we've been under the Territorial Act in Georgia since the 1970s, and that was the original act that set up the territories that are still the guidepost today. So Georgia Power has their territories, and then you've got over 50 municipals providers, and then you've got your co-ops, your electric co-ops, your EMCs. There's 41 of those in Georgia. So since Georgia Power is the only investor on utility, they have to file their rate cases before us. So we do set their rates. We do not set the rates for the nonprofits, the munis, and the EMCs. But that's what we do. And that's, Georgia Power is the largest utility in the state, and that's obviously takes most of our time and our staff's time. We have a great staff at the commission, mainly made up of a lot of really, really bright attorneys, accountants, and engineers. But that's what we do at the PSC.
Okay, great. Now, of course, we're talking about data centers in this series, and the PSC addressed that recently. The large load rule went into effect. It requires what you call large load customers, what I'm going to call data centers, customers that draw over 100 megawatts. It requires them to pay for their own infrastructure costs. When you guys, when the commission was looking at this, what were the issues that you saw and were trying to solve when you created that rule?
Well, what we saw first was just an unprecedented amount of load growth. Georgia Power files their forecast with us by law every 3 years. Going back to the 90s, the law requires the investor-owned utility, Georgia Power, to file their IRP with us, which is the Integrated Resource Plan. That is a 20-year outlook on generation planning for them. So we had that. We had just had an IRP back in 2022, and it was a pretty normal IRP. We weren't really experiencing any really major load growth at the time. For about 20 years or so, really, there hasn't been a lot of load growth because advancements in energy efficiency and the way homes are built and businesses much more efficient. So that efficiency had sort of kept pace with load growth. But then all of a sudden in 23, we saw this amazing amount of load growth. And the primary driver of that, or some 80 to 90% of it, I'd say, was from data centers. So we started looking at, we became concerned immediately and started really looking at what we could do mainly to protect our other ratepayers, to make sure if we're going to have to add load growth and new generation, we want to make sure that these large load customers like data centers that are responsible for that are also responsible for paying the cost of that. So we don't recruit any data centers at the PSC. As a matter of fact, we don't even have anything to do with where they're located. So I guess there must be some planned in Rockdale area, because y'all got folks that are concerned about that. But we don't even keep up with, we don't have anything to do with where they're sited. So we just look at them wherever they are in Georgia. But that's when things really hit the fan for us because of the load growth. So we started working on, ensuring that the cost of any new infrastructure or power plants is not going to be paid by our residential and small business customers, and when it's intended to go towards data centers. So in 2025, early part is when we've adopted those changes that we've been working on for a while, and we imposed these new rules to help with that. And part of those rules requires these data centers to pay for all this new infrastructure.
Well, Alex, I do have a follow-up as far as when he mentioned load growth, and we'd had that steady amount of load for that many years. Commissioner Shaw, this load growth, can our grid handle this load growth? Because some residential customers are concerned that this may cause brownouts, blackouts, this kind of thing. What have you guys at the PSC heard from Georgia Power about their ability to handle this load growth and still provide residential electric service?
So yeah, that's a great question, because that's obviously the biggest question out there is, because we know that these new customers, these new types of customers, like the data centers, use an enormous amount of electricity. But the way we structure things at the commission, and always have, is we do not allow the company to bring on these new customers until we're ensuring that the the grid is there to support that, and the amount of generation required to keep reliability in check is also done. So that's why we had to start adding. The first step is to add some generation to accommodate some growth. The leadership of our state, it's no secret, have made decisions that they want to be a part of this unprecedented amount of growth and infrastructure growth and investment in our country. It's really AI has driven a lot of this, we know, but AI is something that's considered a national security issue because as more AI controls more and more sectors of the economy and more industries and businesses, we know that we want to be able to control that technology here in our country and not be reliant on, particularly on other countries that may or may not be friendly towards our country. So it's a very important thing. So our state leadership had made the decisions to be a part of the equation, and for Georgia to be a big part of the solution here being. So with our state's number one largest utility being Georgia Power that we regulate, obviously we sat down with those same concerns that everyone has had and started working on a plan. So in 23, latter part, I think it is when they filed basically an interim update to the integrated resource plan that had been done the year before, because the forecast had already begun showing a lot of new load growth coming on that would expected to come on the system. So they filed with us, and we had about a 5-month case. It was a little shorter than most of the IRPs because it was more specific. But at that point, we did start adding generation. So you wanted to add your generation, and I've always said to keep it simple, you never want to shut down any of your existing baseload power and other forms of generation until you've replaced it with at least the same amount of valuable generation and resources. So we began to work with Georgia Power and the state to beef up our system at that point. We had already been doing a lot in the 22 and in the 2019 IRP to look at long-range investments in our transmission grid. A lot of the need for the upgrades on the grid already existed, because if you think about the amount of utility scale solar, for instance, that's been built out mainly in the southern part of the state, those electrons were already need to be moved to where the load is, which a lot of the larger load, most of the new load is in the northern part of the state. So a lot of that had already begun in terms of those investments, but then to add more generation is what we're talking about. So a lot's been done. Now we're in a position of just trying to stay focused on what this load growth continues to look like as this new technology with AI and as more data centers are trying to come to our state. We're in a position where obviously this has been an enormous challenge to deal with because it's just so large, and it really happened fast, in my opinion. But we're also in a good spot to be able to take advantage of this really record amount of investment in our state and growth, but to do it in a way where we do it on our timeline and not necessarily the timeline that, say, the data centers are looking to, because they're in a race. We figured that out to try to find power, and they're looking at other states. The large load new rules that we adopted for 100 megawatt plus size customers, which are huge customers, we've since seen over the last couple of years that a lot of other states are sort of following our lead on this. We were really the first to tackle it in a major way with all these new rules and regulations. So a lot of states we've noticed are starting to adopt very similar rules to ours that has all of the everything that you need to ensure that we're protecting our other ratepayers and making sure that these large load customers like data centers are paying the cost.
Well, if you could then tell us what the rule includes that does protect residential ratepayers and ensure that they're not covering those costs.
Get into some detail on what those rules that we adopted. So first of all, these rules, like I said, only pertain to 100 megawatt or greater size customers, which is a large customer. We never really had customers per se that large until the data centers started evolving. Right. So first, we make sure that the data centers pay the upfront cost of the transmission part. to their sites. Because if a substation or transmission line is needed, which for that type of customer, you're going to need those, then the data center has to pay the entire cost up front. If the data center were to leave our state after you've invested in all of this, they do not get any kind of refund for any of the cost. The benefits to the grid will benefit all of the customers, even if the data center leaves. They are stuck paying for that bill. This protects not just the existing customers from ever having to pay for these costs. And then secondly, data centers are having to, because of the rules we adopted, they're having to enter much more longer term contracts than other industrial customers of the past. So we're locking them in now with minimum 15-year commitments with Georgia Power. So the contracts, they have two different rates designed. So the data center has to pay the higher of those two rates each month. The first part of the rate is what we call the minimum bill requirement. This is intended as sort of the backstop to ensure existing customers don't get stuck paying those capital costs incurred that are serving these large customers. It includes all of the capital cost, and even if the data center uses no power at all in a particular month, that generator is still sitting there, so the data center still has to pay that minimum bill. So this is designed to prevent these costs from going on to other customers. And then the second part of the rate is the regular tariff rate for large load customers. And these rates are designed to recover all of the cost incurred in serving these customers, both the fixed cost and the variable cost. So both capital cost and things like operation and maintenance. So typically this rate is going to be much higher than the minimum bill because it's got the usage as well. So as I said, the minimum bill is a backstop to ensure the data centers are paying for the infrastructure, even if they aren't using the power. I hope that kind of tells you a little more about the details of what these
it does, and
customers are having to pay.
It does, and I think implementing the contract increase, because it was initially 5 years, now it's 15 years. I think that's reassuring to a lot of people, because I've heard a number of folks in the community who've been concerned that the data centers will move in, and in 8 years they'll abandon everything and move out, and we'll be on the hook for it. That 15-year contract was a good, smart move. So well done, Chairman.
Well, that's something, these concerns that folks have are valid. And it's the same concerns that the commission, along with our staff, has had from day one. So we feel, this has been a tough thing to go through, but that's why we took our time to start with, and we looked at it and developed a plan. And then now, like I said, we were still the very first state to really, in a meaningful way, conquer this. But at the end of the day, I think all the states are trying to do the same thing. And then there's been some things done on the federal level this year as well to try to do the same thing, which is protect all the other ratepayers. If we're going to allow these data centers to evolve and locate in our country.
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job with the large load rule. There are some things that still need to be addressed. For example, there's an investigation with the PSC at the moment about fuel recovery costs and how those fuel costs will ultimately be allocated, between the large industrial customers and residential ratepayers. And I know you can't go into specifics about this because that investigation is ongoing, but are you able to tell us what the commission's goal or thought process is going into the fuel recovery cost investigation?
Yeah, that's a good question, because what happened was usually every 3 years, Georgia Power does file what's called a fuel case before us. Fuel cases are handled a little differently than everything else that goes into a traditional rate case because fuel cost, the law in Georgia says that fuel costs incurred by the investor-owned utility are basically a pass-through, since they don't earn a return on fuel cost, but they still file a fuel case before us, and we deal with. It does affect the rates in a big way because it's such a big part of the overall cost. and it affects the rates in the way that whether or not over that prior 3 years, if you had an over or an under recovery on the fuel costs that were set in the prior case. And that can be a very big extreme between the two. And I've already seen it in my tenure at the commission. For instance, during the prior administration, we had a fuel case that would have been in 23, and then we had one in 2020. In 2020, we were dealing with a disaster. We were dealing with in 2020, we were dealing with a pretty simple situation. We had an over recovery on fuel, so we were able to credit customers' bills during that year, right after the fuel case was settled, and this would have probably been in the summertime. And then you fast forward 3 years to 23, what had happened with fuel cost in the country, particularly with natural gas, you had a change of administration, a change of policies on the federal level. What happened when you start shutting down pipelines and things, and then you got the Ukraine war started, then you had a huge spike in fuel costs. And what that caused was in the 23 fuel case, we had over a $2 billion under recovery to deal with. That, we had already we were going through Plant Vogel. That was something that I would say I inherited, even though I supported the completion of the project. It was a very, a tough situation. The project was way over budget, and that had to be built into the rate base eventually. But nothing affected the rates more than that fuel case when we had such an under recovery. And so we had another fuel case this year, and we just finished that up, and we did it along with a storm recovery case because of the just enormous effects that the company dealt with from Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Idalia, but mainly Helene. That was just by far the largest single weather event to hit the state, and it affected everyone, especially our utilities. But I'll back up a little bit when I talked about how the commission sets the rates for Georgia Power, and they'll file a rate case. Well, we negotiated a rate freeze with them last year because traditionally in 25, they would have filed a rate case, a rate increase with us that would take place right after the integrated resource plan that we voted on in around July of that year. So we didn't have a rate case, but we did allow them to come in this year at the same time as the fuel case and debate the storm recovery and have a full-fledged transparent case with intervener parties and cross-examination like we do all of our hearings. So we've just finished that. And what came out of that fuel case was a lot of conversation around these large load customers and the fuel costs for them, because most of them are on a very, very complicated billing program called real-time pricing, where all of those costs and incremental costs and everything are built into the rate. And so we felt like that is such a complicated rate in itself that it warranted really, really taking a look at it by itself with nothing else, and let's having a separate docket. So we will be having a separate docket a little later this year, so I can comment on it. None of the parties have filed their testimonies or anything yet, but it'll give us a chance to really look in detail at these large load customers and how their real-time pricing is taking place, and just gives us another opportunity to just make sure that these large load customers, I like to say not just paying their fair share, but I want them to pay more than their fair share. If they're having an enormous impact on the grid, as well as we all know, and it's only fair, in my opinion, that they pay. And what we've been doing so far with our large load rules and regulations is we have done that in a way that we're already seeing that these huge amounts of revenues from these customers is actually helping us to stabilize rates we're still in an inflationary period, let's face it. But the rate freeze that we negotiated last year, we probably wouldn't have never been able to get them to agree to do that if they didn't know that they were experiencing all this huge revenues from these large load customers. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at, the fuel costs from those customers this year. It's going to be a big case because we're I expect staff to not just look at those fuel costs for large load customers, but also really, really look at these forecasts. We're already requiring, as part of our new rules and regs for large loads, for the company to file these quarterly large load reports to us, because this pipeline of projects looking to come to our state, most of it being data centers, we know. Now, Georgia's still the top state for business, so we're still getting large industrial customers. The state's got a lot of prospects out there, but let's face it, the amount of prospects that are out there in the pipeline that are looking to come to Georgia, most of them are data centers.
Right.
That pipeline that I refer to is not something that we deal with per se at the PSC. That's the pipeline that our state economic developers and state leaders are looking at and dealing with various companies that are looking to come to our state. And we have seen that pipeline just continue to just shoot through the roof. And that's really what's been the most amazing thing about this to me, is how fast it happened. Is we've never seen in our lifetime this amount of activity, new activity in our state. So it's something that needs to be managed, and it's something that needs to be, you need to take a steady approach. And that's why we decided to open a separate docket to look at these fuel costs later this year.
So you say it's going to be a large, a lengthy investigation. When do you expect it to wrap up? And when it does wrap up, after it's finalized, what will that look like? Will it result in a new rule? Would it be an addendum to the existing rule? Would it simply be a recommendation to Georgia Power? What do you think we'd be looking at there?
Well, yeah, so we've directed them to file this case with us, and we'll start hearings on it this fall.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be coming out with that soon. We'll have a procedure and scheduling order that we'll adopt that'll set the schedule for all of this. And that way all of the stakeholders and interested parties, and I expect the interested parties in this case to be a lot of the folks that are affected by it. So obviously, just like most of our big cases like this, you'll have your environmental groups, your manufacturers, your consumer protection groups, obviously our staff, our public interest advocacy staff that takes the lead on these cases, and as well as the company. So all the parties that file to intervene in the case will file testimony. And then, the commissioners will make a decision based on after the hearings on the sworn testimony and all the evidence that we've heard, and make decisions based on the record of the case. So it's hard to speculate at this point, what not knowing what we're going to be seeing as far as testimony. Each of the parties get to cross-examine. I think it's a good thing, because the parties that have the most concern get to put their experts up and really dive into what those concerns are and what, try to get all their questions answered. But it also gives those that are, from the manufacturer side. Most of these data centers are members of the Manufacturers Association, I think, and it gives them their day in court, so to speak, to prove that they're paying their fair share, if that's what they're saying. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're double checking. That's what we're fact checking, is to make sure, because it is complicated when you get into the real time pricing and how fuel costs are affected for these type customers.
Yeah, for sure. Look, obviously, I'm glad that a body like the PSC exists. Now, I do fully expect Georgia Power to do the right thing. I don't believe for one second they're in business to alienate and upset their residential customers. However, Senate Bill 34 would have written a lot of these ratepayer protections into law, rather than just leaving it as a set of rules from the PSC. That stalled in the legislature this session, and Senate Bill 34 is the one that Georgia Power opposed. I'm not sure why they opposed it. Maybe they thought they would work better with the PSC. But does the I don't know if you can answer this, but does the commission have a position on whether these protections should eventually be codified in statute rather than left as rules that the commission has created, and the commission is responsible then for enforcing upon Georgia Power.
Well, I'll just speak for myself, certainly not Georgia Power, but yeah, I have no problem with codifying our rules. I know there was a version that did just that, or maybe two versions. I can't remember all the details on what happened during the session on that bill, but I will say that yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with them codifying our rules. But the only thing I said when I testified before committee was that you know, I've said from day one, as we have tried to navigate this challenge of dealing with these large load customers, and we have said all along that just because you go in and you work so hard for months with staff and the company to develop these new rules and regulations, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the last time we're going to have to look at it. This technology is evolving and changing. These large load customers continue to look to our state to place their homes here. And so we're still seeing this as a challenge. So we need to be able to adapt with this and continually look at it. That's why we're forcing the company to file these continuous large load reports. We're having they cannot do anything until they have a contracted sign with an end customer, and then we have another 30 days after that to review those large load contracts to make sure that they do indeed meet all of the regulations that we have called for in our rules. And so a lot's going on there, but I'm not necessarily saying that we're not going to continue to need to look at these rules and potentially even make them even stronger. I mean, it's a mixed bag. I hear people that from the AI community and the economic development community sometimes say that our rules are too strict. And they probably are. I mean, the most strict rules that this commission's ever imposed. But it's because we have to do that, in my opinion. People are concerned. We're concerned. This is new, and it's going to remain something that we need to stay on top of. And that means that we need the flexibility to be able to adopt. Just like what happened this year in the fuel case, when we decided, let's open another docket this year and let's look at these fuel costs for these large load customers and make sure that we're doing that right. We don't need to wait until the legislature comes back in session in January and then hopefully get something done. And then the governor would sign it after the session and say 1st of May or sometime. And then by July, we can get to work. We need to be able to take action at any appropriate time when we see that there's a problem or potential for a problem. And that's the only thing I'm saying is that I would love to see them. I have no problem codifying what we've done, but just make sure that we still have enough flexibility that we can address issues as they come up.
Sure, and it's honestly, it's reassuring to hear you say that. The PSC has obviously looked at a lot of issues and addressed those. The fuel cost is an issue that you're currently looking at. Is there anything else that you think is outstanding currently that you need to look at, or is now just a matter of monitoring this growth and just being reactionary in the future?
Well, I mean, obviously the fuel cost piece is what we're looking at immediately, but I think the main point going forward is just to stay on top of where the industry's headed. We certainly want to be able to track if we start seeing a downturn in it, because we do have some tools available. We've added a lot of generation, and there's the potential for more. At some point, you got to make a decision as a state. What do you want to do here? Do you want to continue to grow, or do you want to put the brakes on this for a while? At the end of the day, you can't make those decisions in the proper way unless you know where you've been and where you're headed. These forecasts that I'm talking about that the company has to file is the crucial part, so that we can track what those forecasts are looking like in terms of what the need's going to be to the grid. What if we're making sure, like I said earlier, we're not going to allow them to go add customers and load until we know that we have got the generation and transmission and the distribution resources to accommodate that. The worst thing we could possibly do here, besides not protecting ratepayers, is to jeopardize the reliability of our grid. That is one thing. Our job at the commission, yeah, sometimes it's tough, but I can tell you, because I live in South Georgia, I've been through 3 hurricanes. I'm telling you, when people call you when their lights out, that's when they're the most upset. And that's where we've shined in this state. We've survived some really big weather events, obviously the hurricanes, but not just that. I'm talking about winter storms. You think back to Winter Storm Elliott, it was called. That was the Christmas storm a few years ago. You remember? A lot of us don't remember it because our lights didn't go out. Okay, right. That's a good thing. That's what we want. But all of our neighbors during that storm, and I'm talking Tennessee Valley Authority customers, all the Carolinas, even into Florida with Duke, they had problems with reliability from that winter storm. They had some generation plants to trip, but they also didn't have enough reserve margin apparently to keep the lights on. We did, and that's what I'm most proud of about, in this case, Georgia Power and our EMCs and our municipals. None of our providers in our state had to enforce any kind of curtailment on their customers, with the exception of the 3 EMCs in the far north part of the state that are served by Tennessee Valley Authority. So that's something I'm proud of. We have the most, in my opinion, the most reliable grid in the country. And that's why Georgia is leading the state in business, and why a lot of states and companies want to come here, because they want reliable service and they want competitive rates. So I'm proud of that. And that's why we've got to do all we can to protect not just the affordability piece, but the reliability piece.
And Alex, and that comes back to why I was been told by end users why they want to come to Georgia is because of the reliability of the electric grid.
Right.
I've actually been told that, Commissioner.
Right.
So, and you guys have been told that.
And if we do this right, which I think we're doing it right, and we got to stay on it. But if we do this right, we're just going to strengthen our grid. We're going to allow these large load customers with all their money and resources help us make our grid even better.
We're going to let them pay for it.
That's right.
Yeah. And Chairman, you should be proud of the record of reliability. And thankfully, your plan is to ensure that that doesn't change moving forward, even with this extra demand from data centers. That's very reassuring to me, and I'm sure it is to our viewers. I think that's actually a great place to leave this. Look, I can't thank you enough for coming on and answering these questions. If people have questions for the PSC, are they able to contact the PSC directly if they have any follow-ups to this?
Oh, absolutely. It's, psc.ga.gov is our website. We've got our consumer protection unit. You've got direct emails to all the commissioners in our offices. So yeah, we're open for business every single day. We have committees every other Thursday, and then we set the agenda for our administrative session votes the following Tuesday. So we're in the office, we're there. We're easy to reach because we don't have offices all around the state. We're a very small agency per se. I mean, we've got about, I'd say we're up to almost 90 employees total. So we're very lean and mean. I mean, I know other commissions around the country that have 5 times more employees than we do, but we get it done. So yeah, we're there, and we'd love to take your calls and anything. If you've got a problem with your utility, even if it's one of the municipals that we don't regulate per se, we still know people, and we can help connect dots sometimes and get you in touch with them. But anytime we can help, please tell folks to come see us.
We appreciate that. PSC Chairman Jason Shaw, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. You too. Y'all have a great day, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.